"You're just a janitor, you're useless," the CEO mocked as he slashed my benefits. What he didn't realize was that I owned the patent for the core software the entire company depended on. I pulled the license for breach of contract. By the next morning, the stock had crashed nearly 80%. The polished marble floors hummed under my industrial-grade buffer, a familiar drone that was both companion and camouflage. In the dead of night, these executive suites, so alive with ambition and ego by day, became silent temples to power, their secrets scattered across desks like forgotten offerings. And I, Diana, the janitor, moved among them, a ghost in a gray uniform, unseen, unheard, utterly dismissed. But within that quiet invisibility, I held a truth, a singular, digital thread, woven by my own hands years ago, upon which this entire glittering empire was built. They called it TechCore. He called me trash. And that, I can tell you, was the beginning of the end of everything he thought he knew. It's an odd thing to be looked through. To exist in a space where others perceive you not as a person, but as part of the furniture, an extension of the building's infrastructure. For 12 years, as a sanitation engineer at TechCore Industries, this was my daily reality. People, important people, would stride past, their conversations echoing off the pristine surfaces I maintained, never once making eye contact. Their uniforms were sharp suits and silk ties, mine, a practical, anonymous gray. And most days, I didn't mind. The pay was steady, the benefits solid, and the overnight shifts gave me an invaluable commodity: time to think, time to remember, time to plot. Before the mop bucket and the industrial cleaner became my constant companions, I was Diana, a software engineer, 41 years old, with 2 patents to my name. My second patent, filed way back in 2009, was for a sophisticated algorithm, a unique method for real-time data processing and integration that I'd forged during my graduate studies at Carnegie Mellon. After graduation, I licensed this intellectual property to a fledgling startup called Data Sync Solutions. The terms, at the time, seemed more than fair: a modest annual fee, plus a percentage of any revenue gleaned from products utilizing my algorithm. It was a good deal, a proud achievement, a testament to years of tireless work. Then, as it so often does, life began to unravel. Educational Insight 1. The invisible labor paradox. Sociologists often refer to the invisible labor paradox, where foundational work, critical for the functioning of any system or organization, is frequently undervalued, underpaid, and goes largely unnoticed. This paradox highlights how societies and corporations often operate with significant blind spots, failing to recognize the profound dependencies they have on the very individuals they deem unskilled or expendable. Roughly 3 years after that licensing agreement, my world fractured. My husband, the man I'd built a life with, left, taking half our savings and a piece of my heart with him. The divorce was brutal, financially and emotionally. Then came the diagnosis: early onset Alzheimer's for my mother. The medical bills, the crushing reality of round-the-clock care, began to pile up faster than I could ever hope to pay them. To top it all off, the engineering firm where I'd worked downsized, and I, a woman in her late 30s, found myself adrift in a fast-paced industry that seemed to have no place for me. The janitorial position at TechCore wasn't a choice, it was survival. It was how I kept the lights on, how I kept my mother in the care facility that didn't have horrifying reviews of neglect and abuse. I was a software architect scrubbing toilets, all to hold my fractured life together. When TechCore Industries acquired Data Sync Solutions in 2015, it was a colossal deal, worth hundreds of millions. My licensing agreement, a tiny speck in that corporate behemoth, transferred with the sale. Their legal team, diligent as sharks, reviewed every existing contract, affirmed the validity of my agreement, and without a hitch, continued my quarterly payments. $8,000 every 3 months. It wasn't enough to change my life, but it was enough for my mother's care. It was a lifeline. And for 9 years, those payments arrived like clockwork. Little did they know, they weren't just paying for an algorithm. They were paying for the very air they breathed. Never once, not for a single moment, did I consider revealing my true connection to their core technology. Why would I? The engineers who populated the cubicles by day barely registered my presence, their gazes sliding over me as if I were a pane of glass. The executives, whose confidential documents I meticulously cleaned around every night, never imagined the silent woman emptying their trash might comprehend the technical specifications sprawled across their desks. Invisibility was a cloak I wore willingly. It suited me. I performed my duties, collected my checks, and every Sunday, I visited my mother, holding her hand, watching her gentle, fading smiles. I thought this quiet existence would be my future. I was wrong. Everything shifted 6 months ago. His name was Maxwell Sterling, and he arrived like a storm front, hired by the board to modernize operations and maximize shareholder value. Corporate speak, I quickly learned, for gutting the company and shedding employees. Sterling was a private equity creature, the kind of man who viewed human beings as line items on a balance sheet. 53 years old, silver-haired, with a perpetual, sun-kissed tan that hinted at more time on golf courses than in boardrooms. His first company-wide meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I was finishing my overnight shift, emptying the last trash bins in the very conference room where his reign of terror would begin. He walked in early, a hurricane of dismissive energy, barking into his phone about trimming the fat and eliminating redundancies. His eyes, cold and calculating, flickered over me, a momentary frown, then a dismissive flick of his hand, a clear signal for me to vanish. I finished the last bin, the wheels of my cart squeaking in the sudden silence. As I turned to leave, his voice, sharp and commanding, sliced through the air. He'd covered the microphone, but his intent was clear. Hey, make sure those windows are spotless. We've got important people coming in. I replied politely, the windows were cleaned yesterday, sir. They should still be fine. His eyes narrowed, pinning me with an icy stare. I don't pay you to talk back. I pay you to clean. Do your job. I nodded, a silent surrender, and wheeled my cart away. That interaction, brief and chilling, set the tone for the coming storm. Educational insight 2. The narcissistic CEO and dehumanization, individuals exhibiting traits of the dark triad, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, are disproportionately represented in leadership positions. A narcissistic leader like Sterling often perceives employees as tools to achieve personal gain, leading to dehumanization. This process, where others are viewed as objects rather than sentient beings, makes it easier to inflict harm, cut benefits, or dismiss their worth without experiencing empathy or moral qualms. Over the next 3 months, Sterling tore through TechCore like a wildfire. He axed nearly 20% of the workforce, targeting older, higher-salaried employees. He slashed training budgets, gutted retirement matching, and decimated benefits packages. Wall Street applauded his aggressive cost-cutting. The stock price nudged upwards. His sights then turned to the facility staff. Late September found us, 32 strong, from fresh-faced rookies to veterans nearing retirement, huddled in a basement conference room. The air was thick with the acrid scent of industrial cleaner and the palpable dread of impending doom. Sterling stood at the front, flanked by a gaunt woman named Veronica, his new head of operations, who seemed to relish delivering bad news. He wasted no time. Effective immediately, we're restructuring the facilities department, he announced, his voice devoid of warmth. Healthcare benefits will be reduced to the absolute legal minimum. Paid time off will be cut to match industry standards. Annual raises? Suspended indefinitely. A maintenance worker named Thomas, a man who'd given 20 years of his life to TechCore, tentatively raised a hand. Sir, some of us were promised certain benefits when we were hired. Sterling's laugh, a sharp, condescending bark, cut him off. Benefits change, the world changes. If you don't like it, there are plenty of people grateful for your position. I stood near the back, my heart a cold stone in my chest. The benefit reductions meant one terrifying thing. I wouldn't be able to afford my mother's care. Her Alzheimer's had tightened its grip. She needed constant supervision. The cheaper facilities I'd researched were horror stories of neglect and abuse, images that turned my stomach. An older man, Robert, his voice trembling with quiet fury, spoke up next. These cuts will hurt people who can barely make ends meet as it is. Sterling's expression hardened, his eyes like chips of ice. You pick up trash and mop floors. That's not exactly skilled labor. You're easily replaceable. So, I suggest you accept the new terms gracefully." The room fell silent, a suffocating vacuum of humiliation and anger. I felt something crystalline settle deep within me, a chilling, absolute certainty of how little this man valued us, how little he valued anyone. And that, my friends, was the moment I stopped being just a janitor. That night, back in my small apartment, the silence was heavy, punctuated only by the distant city hum. I retrieved a worn file folder from my bedroom closet. Inside, nestled among patent certificates and old correspondence, lay the original licensing agreement. My fingers traced the words, a forgotten language now charged with potent new meaning. Section 7.3, in particular, snagged my attention. It was a clause I'd insisted upon back when I was just a bright-eyed grad student. A clause allowing me to terminate the agreement immediately if the licensee materially breached the contract or engaged in conduct that brought disrepute to my intellectual property. Any termination, it specified, would demand the licensee cease using the patented technology within 30 days. For 2 weeks, I became a phantom researcher. I delved into TechCore's public filings, their system architecture, piecing together a terrifying mosaic. My algorithm, that elegant piece of code, wasn't just part of their operations. It was the very bedrock. Every major system, from inventory management to customer data processing, rested on the foundation I'd built 15 years ago. Ripping it out would be like yanking the engine from a jet mid-flight. I also dug into Maxwell Sterling's past. His resume was a trail of corporate destruction. Companies bought, gutted, assets sold, and then his swift departure before the long-term damage became undeniable. 2 lawsuits for breach of fiduciary duty, settled out of court. Business journals whispered of a scorched earth management style. The more I learned, the clearer the path forward became. Sterling wasn't just harming workers. He was using my technology to fund practices that violated its very spirit. His public dismissal of us, the unskilled, replaceable facilities staff, was a direct assault on the dignity of intellectual property that fundamentally relied on our labor to function. This was disrepute. This was breach. Educational Insight 3, Cognitive Biases in Corporate Acquisitions. Corporate acquisitions, especially of smaller startups, are often plagued by cognitive biases. Hubris and confirmation bias can lead larger entities to undervalue the critical intellectual property or human capital of the acquired company, assuming their superior resources grant them unquestionable leverage. This frequently results in a failure to maintain institutional knowledge about vital dependencies and licensing obligations, setting the stage for unforeseen vulnerabilities. I contacted Patricia Holloway, an intellectual property attorney in her 60s, whose office in downtown Pittsburgh was a warm sanctuary of leather-bound legal tomes and framed patents. She listened, a quiet, intense presence, as I laid out my improbable tale. Her notes were precise, her questions pointed. When I finished, she leaned back, studying me with keen eyes. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. "I wasn't planning anything until 2 weeks ago," I admitted, the truth raw and urgent. I'd honestly forgotten about the termination clauses. I just wanted to do my job and take care of my mother. And now I want them to understand that every person matters, that you can't treat human beings like disposable equipment and expect no consequences. Patricia nodded slowly, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I've been practicing IP law for 38 years. I've seen plenty of licensing disputes, but nothing quite like this. Usually, it's corporations fighting corporations. An individual patent holder against a major company? That, my dear, is David versus Goliath territory. Does David ever win?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "When he's got a good sling and the right stone," she replied, "absolutely." For the next 3 hours, we meticulously sifted through my documentation. Patricia scrutinized the original licensing agreement, the acquisition paperwork proving TechCore assumed data syncs obligations, my 9 years of uninterrupted quarterly payment records. "This assignment clause," she declared, tapping a paragraph in the acquisition documents, "is gold. They explicitly agreed to honor all existing licenses. They can't claim ignorance." Then she read Section 7.3 aloud again. If the licensee engages in conduct that brings disrepute to the licensed technology or uses the technology in ways that conflict with the licensor's ethical standards. That's remarkably broad language, she noted. I wrote that clause specifically, I explained. I didn't want my work used for purposes I disagreed with. Smart. Very smart, Patricia affirmed. And Sterling's public statements about facilities workers being unskilled and disposable absolutely qualify as bringing disrepute to technology that relies on those workers to function. The connection is direct and demonstrable. Over the next week, I became Patricia's eyes and ears inside TechCore. I photographed internal memos discussing the benefits cuts, documents where facility staff were explicitly labeled expendable overhead. I even recorded audio from a department meeting where Sterling delivered another contemptuous rant about low-level employees. Patricia also had me compile a technical analysis of my algorithm's integration. Cleaning the IT department at night meant I'd seen countless system architecture diagrams. My analysis, born of those secret observations, revealed a truth even I hadn't fully grasped. My algorithm was the company's entire technology stack. Without your algorithm, Patricia declared, reviewing my findings, they'd have to rebuild from scratch. That's not a month-long project, Diana. That's years. Plural. I knew it was important, I said, but I didn't realize the extent. Patricia shrugged. This is what happens when companies acquire technology without maintaining institutional knowledge about dependencies. They forget that intellectual property rights are powerful. They assume individual patent holders have no leverage. Our second meeting focused on strategy. Patricia laid out the options, from negotiating improved benefits to the nuclear option, full license termination. You give them 30 days notice, she explained. After that, they can't legally use your technology. The company would essentially cease functioning. Would they comply? I asked, a tremor in my voice. They'd have no choice. If they continued using it, you could seek massive statutory damages. Billions. No publicly traded company would take that risk. What about a middle ground? I suggested. Threaten termination. Negotiate better terms, benefits for staff, maybe governance changes? Patricia considered me. That's probably the smart play if you just want to improve conditions. But then I remembered Sterling's laugh. The contempt in his eyes, the cold, hard words. I thought of Thomas's humiliation, Robert's quiet rage. I thought of those dehumanizing memos. I want full termination, I said. The words clear and unwavering. Not as a negotiating tactic. Actual termination. Patricia's gaze was sharp. That's going to hurt a lot of innocent people, Diana. If the company collapses, thousands lose their jobs. I know, I replied, my voice steady. But if I negotiate halfway, Sterling learns nothing. The company changes some policies, pays me more, and the fundamental problem continues. People like him need to face actual consequences, not just minor adjustments. You understand this will get ugly, she pressed. They'll come after you with everything they have. They'll try to dig up anything to use against you. They'll make your life miserable. I met her gaze. My life is already cleaning toilets for people who treat me like I'm invisible. How much worse can it get? Patricia smiled, a grim, acknowledging curve of her lips. Fair point. All right. If we're doing this, we do it right. Ironclad documentation, perfect procedure, unassailable legal grounds. No shortcuts, no mistakes. Educational insight 4. The psychology of leverage and corporate intimidation. In situations of asymmetrical power, corporations frequently employ intimidation tactics, relying on their vast resources to overwhelm individuals. This includes lengthy, aggressive legal responses, the threat of countersuits, and attempts to exhaust an opponent through sheer volume of litigation. The effectiveness of these tactics often hinges on the individual's psychological resilience and their understanding that such actions are frequently bluster rather than substantive legal threats. Patricia spent another 2 meetings meticulously reviewing everything. This is airtight, she announced during our second session. You have every legal right to terminate this license. The question is whether you're prepared for the fallout. What kind of fallout? I asked. TechCore will fight this with everything they have. They'll claim the termination is invalid, that you're acting in bad faith, that the contract terms don't mean what they plainly say. They'll drag you through court for years if they can. Can they win? Patricia's smile was slight. Not if I have anything to say about it. Your contract is crystal clear. But litigation is expensive and exhausting. Are you sure you want to do this? I thought of my mother, her hand in mine, her eyes often blank but sometimes filled with a fleeting recognition. I thought of Thomas and Robert, their dignity stripped away. I thought of Maxwell Sterling's contemptuous laugh. I'm sure, I said. The termination notice was prepared over the next week. Patricia drafted a letter, citing specific breaches, providing the required 30-day notice. She attached the documentation, Sterling's public statements, the internal memos I'd photographed, the evidence of TechCore's reliance on my technology. On November 15th, the letter, heavy with its implications, was dispatched via certified mail to TechCore's legal department, with copies to the board of directors and Maxwell Sterling personally. Then we waited. The initial silence was deafening. For 48 hours, nothing. I continued my rounds, a ghost among the oblivious. Part of me wondered if the notice had even been received, if some junior attorney had simply filed it away, blind to its true significance. On the third day, the air began to thicken. I was cleaning the 7th floor at 2 a.m. when I noticed lights still blazing in the legal department, a rare sight. Through the glass walls, I could make out 6 figures huddled around a table, papers spread everywhere. As I emptied their trash, fragments of conversation drifted to my ears. Catastrophic, unforeseen, exposure. Someone mentioned outside counsel. A voice, sharp with panic, muttered about a complete operational shutdown. The next morning, my phone rang. A professional but strained voice introduced herself as Ruth Carmichael from TechCore's legal department. Miss Diana, we received your notice of license termination. We'd like to meet with you to discuss the matter. Would you be available this afternoon? I kept my voice calm. I work nights, so afternoons aren't good. I could meet during my shift, around 11 p.m. There was a pause, a small, choked gasp on the other end of the line. That's rather unconventional. I'm a night shift janitor, I replied. Unconventional hours are my normal. Ruth, clearly unaccustomed to having her schedule dictated by anyone, especially a janitor, eventually agreed. I called Patricia immediately. They're going to try to pressure you, make you feel unreasonable, she warned. Don't engage directly. Let me be the bad guy. That evening, Patricia sent a formal response, declining the meeting and reiterating that all communications must go through her. She also included a detailed letter, explicitly laying out our grounds for termination. TechCore's response was swift and brutal. Their outside counsel, a New York behemoth, sent a 20-page letter, arguing the termination was invalid on multiple counts. They claimed my interpretation of Section 7.3 was too broad, that Sterling's comments had nothing to do with the technology, that I was acting in bad faith. Patricia, reading it aloud to me over the phone, occasionally chuckled at their more desperate arguments. They're throwing everything at the wall, hoping something sticks, she said. None of this has merit, but they're trying to intimidate you with volume. So, what happens now? I asked. Now, she replied, they'll probably file for an injunction. They'll ask a court to prevent the license termination while they litigate. We'll oppose it. Given how clear the contract language is, I doubt they'll succeed, but we need to be prepared. As the legal maneuvering began, I noticed subtle shifts within TechCore. Security personnel I'd never seen before started patrolling the floors. The IT department, normally a quiet hum, buzzed with frantic, late-night activity. I overheard whispers of contingency planning and alternative architecture. One night, I encountered Gregory, the chief technology officer, leaving his office at 3 a.m. He looked utterly spent, his tie loosened, his shirt wrinkled. For the first time in 5 years, he actually made eye contact with me. You're Diana, right? He asked, a hint of desperation in his voice. The woman with a patent? I nodded, surprised. That's me. Gregory laughed, a hollow, humorless sound. Do you have any idea what you're doing to us? We've got 200 engineers working around the clock trying to replace your algorithm. It's like trying to rebuild an airplane's engine while it's flying. Maybe you should have treated your workers better, I suggested quietly. His face tightened. I never did anything to facilities staff. This isn't my fault. You stood by while Sterling did it, I countered, my voice low but firm. You benefited from a system that exploited people, and then discarded them. That makes you complicit. He stared at me for a long moment, then simply walked away, the weight of his exhaustion visible in his slumped shoulders. I finished cleaning his office, his desk littered with technical diagrams, all displaying failed attempts to replicate my algorithm. The reality was setting in. The call came faster than anticipated. On day 28 of the notice period, Sterling's assistant called my cell, demanding I come to his office immediately. I was scheduled to work that night anyway, so at 10 p.m. I arrived, still in my gray uniform. His office, a monument to corporate power, occupied the entire northwest corner of the top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying panorama of the city lights. He sat behind a massive reclaimed wood desk, his suit jacket draped over his chair. Sit down, he ordered, without preamble. I remained standing. I prefer not to. His jaw tightened. You sent us a very concerning letter. Our attorneys say it's completely baseless. Your attorneys are wrong. Sterling leaned back, his gaze predatory. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you're making a serious mistake. This company has resources you can't imagine. We'll bury you in legal fees before you can blink. The contract is clear, I replied, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I'm within my rights to terminate the license. You have 27 days remaining to cease using my technology. Your technology? He laughed, that same condescending sound from the facilities meeting. You're a janitor. You pick up trash. You don't own anything we use. I own patent number 7,891,234, I stated, my voice calm and precise, filed in 2009, covering real-time data processing and integration algorithms. Data Sync Solutions licensed that technology from me. Your company acquired Data Sync in 2015. The licensing agreement transferred with the acquisition. You've been paying me quarterly fees for 9 years. The color drained from his face. He fumbled for his phone. Get legal up here. Now. 20 minutes later, 3 attorneys, including Ruth, and a visibly nervous Gregory, the CTO, crowded into the office. For an hour, they grilled me, examined the contract copies I'd brought, made increasingly frantic phone calls. Finally, Ruth, her composure shattered, spoke. Her contract is valid. The patent is enforceable. If she terminates the license, we'll need to shut down approximately 80% of our operations within 30 days. Sterling's face turned crimson. That's impossible. We'll fight this. We can try, Ruth said, her voice strained. But she has grounds for termination. Mr. Sterling, your public statements about facilities workers could absolutely be construed as bringing disrepute to intellectual property that relies on their labor. That's absurd. Nevertheless, Ruth concluded, it's in the contract. Section 7.3, subsection B. I stood up. You have 27 days. I suggest you start planning your transition. Sterling slammed his hand on the desk. You'll regret this. I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. I already work in this industry, I replied quietly. I pick up your trash, remember? You made it very clear that I don't matter. I walked out of his office, took the elevator to the ground floor, and drove home. My hands didn't start shaking until I was safely inside my apartment. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of legal chaos. TechCore's lawyers filed for an emergency injunction, citing irreparable harm. Patricia, calm and collected, countered with our ironclad documentation. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Martinez, denied the injunction, ruling that TechCore had ample notice and should have been more aware of their technology dependencies. The hearing itself was surreal. I sat in a federal courtroom, wearing the interview suit I'd bought 12 years ago, surrounded by TechCore's army of attorneys, their suits costing more than my annual salary. They spun elaborate tales of economic impact and shareholder value. Patricia, standing alone, presented the simple truth: my patent, the licensing agreement, the acquisition documents, the termination clause. She even played audio of Sterling's dismissive comments. Judge Martinez, sharp-eyed and unimpressed, cut through their rhetoric. Counselor, She asked TechCore's lead attorney, "Does Section 7.3 grant Miss Diana the right to terminate this license if the licensee engages in conduct bringing disrepute to the licensed technology?" The attorney stammered, attempting to argue intent, but the judge cut him off. "It's a yes or no question. Does the contract grant her this right?" "Technically, yes, Your Honor, but..." "And has your client engaged in conduct that a reasonable person might consider brings disrepute to technology relied upon by the very workers he publicly dismissed as unskilled and disposable?" The attorney hesitated, visibly sweating. "We dispute that characterization." "I didn't ask if you dispute it. I asked if a reasonable person might reach that conclusion." "Possibly." Judge Martinez leaned forward. "Then Miss Diana is exercising a contractual right she explicitly negotiated for, and that your client agreed to when they acquired data sync solutions." "The injunction is denied." As we left the courthouse, Patricia squeezed my shoulder. "That went as well as we could have hoped." Martinez is sharp. She saw through their bombast immediately. "What about the appeal?" I asked. "They'll lose. The contract is too clear. But it buys them a few more days to panic. And hopefully realize they need to settle rather than fight." News of the situation, fueled by leaks, exploded in the business press. Tech blogs were mesmerized by the narrative of a janitor bringing a corporation to its knees. Stock analysts began dissecting TechCore's risk management, questioning how they had become so dependent on an individual's licensed technology. The coverage intensified after a reporter named Marcus Webb unearthed internal TechCore emails, showing that executives had indeed dismissed my licensing agreement years ago. One email, from a former general counsel, explicitly recommended purchasing the patent outright but was overruled because, as the email stated, the current arrangement is cheaper and the licensor has no leverage. That phrase became a rallying cry. Other undervalued workers, patent holders, flooded my inbox with messages of solidarity, sharing their own stories. Not all the attention was positive. Some commentators accused me of extortion, of destroying jobs. Online trolls sent threats. But Patricia simply told me to ignore them. "They're defending a system that benefits them," she said. "Of course, they're angry when someone outside their class exercises power." The stock price, initially resilient, began to crater. Small declines at first, then larger, as investors grasped the full scope of the problem. Sterling's attempts to reassure shareholders only made things worse. He dismissed my patent as outdated technology easily replaced. Patricia filed a defamation claim within hours. Within 48, Sterling issued a retraction and a public apology. Behind the scenes, TechCore's engineers, desperate, toiled to develop workarounds. They quickly confirmed what I already knew: my algorithm was too elegant, too fundamental, to be easily replicated. Any alternative would require rebuilding their entire infrastructure, a process measured in years, not months. On day 28 of the 30-day notice period, Ruth Carmichael called Patricia, requesting an emergency meeting. We met at Patricia's office at 8 a.m. on a Saturday. Ruth looked utterly drained, dark circles under her eyes, her impeccable suit wrinkled. She sat across from us, radiating tension. "Let me be direct," Ruth began, her voice hoarse. "We've explored every possible alternative. Our engineers have worked day and night. The conclusion is unanimous. We cannot replace your algorithm in any reasonable time frame." "How long would it take?" Patricia asked. 18 to 24 months minimum. And that's assuming everything goes perfectly, which it never does. Realistically, we're looking at 3 years. "So, you need a license," I stated. Ruth nodded, defeated. "The board has authorized me to present a settlement proposal." She slid a folder across the table. Inside was a formal offer: $18 million for a 10-year license extension, full restoration of benefits for all facilities workers, and an employee relations committee to review workplace policies. I read through it carefully. $18 million was generational wealth, enough to secure my mother's future, enough to transform my life. The benefits restoration would help my coworkers. The committee sounded good. But something felt wrong. The committee had no real power, just an advisory role. The benefits restoration was limited only to facilities staff, ignoring the other departments Sterling had cut. And Sterling himself? No accountability. He would remain CEO, continue his reign. This isn't enough, I said. Ruth's expression tightened. Ms. Diana, $18 million is an extraordinarily generous offer for a license extension. I don't think you understand. I understand perfectly, I countered. You're offering me money to make this problem go away, while changing as little as possible. Sterling keeps his job. The company culture remains toxic. In 5 years, you'll be right back where you started, with different workers. What do you want? Ruth asked, frustration seeping into her professional tone. $28 million. Full benefits restoration for all departments affected by Sterling's cuts. The employee committee needs binding authority, not advisory status. And Sterling resigns as CEO. Ruth shot to her feet. That's impossible. The board would never agree to force out a sitting CEO as part of a licensing settlement. Then I guess we don't have a deal, I said calmly. You're destroying thousands of jobs out of spite. Patricia intervened smoothly. Miss Carmichael, my client is exercising her legal rights. If TechCore faces business difficulties, that's a consequence of your company's own decisions. Acquiring technology without understanding the terms, building your entire infrastructure on licensed IP, and alienating the licensor through mistreatment of workers. None of this is Ms. Diana's fault. Ruth gathered her papers with sharp, angry movements. The board will never agree to this. Then you have 48 hours until the license terminates, I replied. I suggest you communicate our position clearly. After Ruth left, Patricia poured us both coffee. You know, she's probably right about the board. Removing a CEO is a huge ask. I know, I said, stirring sugar into my cup. But Sterling is the problem. As long as he's in charge, nothing really changes. They just put a prettier face on the same exploitation. Are you prepared to walk away from $28 million if they refuse? She asked, her eyes searching mine. I thought of my mother, the years of expensive care ahead. I thought of the security that money offered, the freedom from financial anxiety. $28 million could solve every practical problem in my life. But then I thought of Thomas and Robert, of all the others who'd been told they didn't matter. I thought of the next round of employees who would suffer under Sterling's leadership. Could I live with myself if I took the money and walked away while he continued destroying lives? Yes, I said, the word firm and clear. I'm prepared to walk away. Patricia smiled. Good. Because they'll agree eventually. They have no choice. She was right. The next day, Sunday, Ruth called again. This time, she arrived with 2 other attorneys and a representative from TechCore's board of directors, a silver-haired man named Lawrence, the lead independent director. Lawrence took charge immediately. Miss Diana, I want to be clear about something. Maxwell Sterling was brought in to increase shareholder value. He accomplished that goal. Our stock price increased 17% in his first 6 months, and then dropped 62% in the last 3 weeks. Due to this licensing dispute, Patricia countered, not his leadership. The licensing dispute exists because of his leadership, I said. He created this situation by treating workers so badly that I chose to terminate the agreement rather than continue profiting from technology used to support that treatment. Lawrence studied me, a calculating look in his eyes. You really believe that? Or are you just using this as leverage to extract maximum payment? I believe every person deserves basic dignity, regardless of their job title, I stated. I believe leaders who fail to provide that dignity shouldn't be leading. And yes, I'm using the leverage I have to demand change, because apparently, that's the only language corporations understand. The room fell silent. Lawrence exchanged glances with Ruth and the other attorneys. Finally, he spoke. The board is prepared to accept your terms, with one modification. Sterling will resign, but we need 60 days to manage the transition. We can't just dump a CEO overnight without market chaos. 30 days, I countered. You announce his resignation immediately as part of the settlement, effective in 30 days. That gives you time to manage the transition while making clear that accountability is immediate. 30 days isn't enough. It's what you have left before the license terminates anyway. I replied. Figure it out. Lawrence leaned back, his expression unreadable. Then he stood and extended his hand. You drive a hard bargain, Miss Diana. We have a deal. The final terms were hammered out over the next 6 hours. $35 million, paid in a combination of cash and TechCore stock. Full benefits restoration for all affected departments. An employee advisory board with binding authority on workplace policies. And Maxwell Sterling's resignation, announced immediately, effective in 30 days. Ruth, blinking in disbelief at the final figure, stammered, "Miss Diana, I don't think you understand the generosity of our offer." "I understand perfectly," I replied. "Your stock has dropped 62% in 3 weeks. The board is facing shareholder lawsuits. Several major clients are considering alternative vendors. Mr. Sterling's leadership has been catastrophic for your company's reputation and stability. 35 million and his resignation, or the license terminates in 48 hours. They caucused outside for 20 minutes. When they returned, Ruth's expression was grim. "We'll need board approval for a change in leadership." "You have 48 hours, I repeated. The board met in an emergency session that Sunday night. By Monday morning, news outlets reported that Maxwell Sterling was stepping down to pursue other opportunities. The interim CEO, a woman named Catherine, previously the COO, immediately announced a comprehensive review of company culture and employee relations. The final settlement agreement was signed on day 30. I received the $35 million. All facilities workers had their original benefits restored, with an additional enhancement package. The company established an employee advisory board with real decision-making authority. I worked my last shift as a janitor on a cold Wednesday in December. Several of my former co-workers organized a small celebration in the break room, bringing homemade food and a cake decorated with the words, "You mattered all along." Thomas shook my hand firmly. "You didn't just fight for yourself. You fought for all of us." "We should have been valued from the beginning," I replied. "I just made sure that happened." The money changed my life in practical ways. My mother now resides in the finest memory care facility in the region, in a sunlit room overlooking lush gardens, treated with genuine kindness and respect. She rarely recognizes me, but she is peaceful and content. I bought a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. I donated substantial amounts to scholarships for older workers trying to transition into new careers, and funded a legal clinic that helps employees fight workplace discrimination and benefits violations. The remaining money is invested conservatively, generating more income than I could ever need. TechCore survived the crisis, though it took 2 years for the stock price to fully recover. Catherine proved to be a capable CEO, steering the company towards sustainable growth. TechCore renegotiated a 20-year licensing agreement with me at fair market rates, and I consult occasionally on technology development projects. Maxwell Sterling resurfaced at another company 18 months later, but his reputation never recovered. Business journals still reference the TechCore incident as a cautionary tale in MBA programs about the importance of treating all employees with respect. I never returned to software engineering full-time. Those years as a janitor taught me something invaluable about visibility and worth. The most important work isn't always the most recognized, and the people society overlooks often possess knowledge and power that nobody suspects. Sometimes, I still drive past TechCore's headquarters, and the memories flood back. The quiet hum of machinery, the scent of expensive polish, the ghost of my invisible uniform. I remember being dismissed, told I didn't matter, because my work involved mops instead of code. The algorithm I developed still runs through every system in that building, processing millions of transactions daily. It was created by someone they underestimated completely, and it nearly destroyed them when they forgot that every person, regardless of their job title, deserves basic dignity and respect. Maxwell Sterling learned that lesson the expensive way. I hope he remembers it, though I suspect people like him rarely change fundamentally. They move on to new positions, new companies, new opportunities to prove how little they've learned. But I remember everything. I remember the contemptuous laugh, the dismissive gestures, the casual cruelty of being told you're easily replaceable. I remember standing in that basement conference room, watching my coworkers absorb the message that their years of service and hard work meant nothing to the people making decisions. Most of all, I remember the moment Maxwell Sterling's face changed, when he realized the janitor he'd mocked owned the technology his entire empire was built on. That memory, I can tell you, brings me satisfaction on difficult days. Patricia retired last year, We stay in touch. She sends cards on holidays, usually with notes about other cases where seemingly powerless people found leverage against institutional abuse. You started something, she wrote recently. More workers are fighting back, standing up, demanding better. You showed them it's possible. Maybe that's true. I hope it is. Everyone deserves to be treated with basic human decency, regardless of whether they're cleaning offices or running corporations. The person emptying your trash might be invisible to you, but they're never powerless. They might just own the patent to everything you've built, and they might decide one day that you've breached the contract in ways that can't be forgiven or forgotten. Sterling discovered that truth too late. His company survived, barely, after losing 80% of its value in a single month. His career never recovered from being outwitted by someone he considered beneath his notice. I've moved forward with my life, financially secure, and finally visible on my own terms. My mother lives comfortably. The workers I fought alongside have better protections and benefits. The scholarship fund helps dozens of people every year rebuild careers. I don't regret any of it. Justice isn't always loud or immediate, but sometimes it arrives with perfect clarity, delivered by the person you least expected, in the form you never saw coming. That's the kind of revenge that changes everything. The stock dropped 80% overnight. The CEO resigned in disgrace. The workers gained protections and dignity. And the janitor, who supposedly didn't matter, walked away with $35 million and the satisfaction of knowing she'd been underestimated exactly once. Nobody makes that mistake anymore. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many unseen architects are quietly holding the keys to our perceived power, just waiting for the moment to reclaim their worth, to expose the fragile foundations of empires built on disregard.